Sony's $3,200 full-frame mirrorless Alpha A7R III is a beast. With an ultra-high-res 42.4 megapixel sensor that can shoot bursts at 10 fps. It also handles video like a boss, recording 4K without line skipping, and super slow-mo 1080p at 120 fps. The Sony A7R III uses the same sensor as the A7R II that came before it, but just about everything else has changed. The image processor and circuitry that drives it are new, which improves dynamic range. The processor also drives a new autofocus system, which allows the camera to track moving action at 10 fps, at 42 megapixel resolution, at a high-capacity battery, improved handling, and a larger viewfinder, and you have a full-frame mirrorless camera that is as formidable as competing SLRs. There are manual controls for everything on this camera, and the buttons and dials are largely the same as on the A7R II, except for two major changes. The first is the addition of a touchscreen, which is dedicated to changing the focus region with just a tap. The other is a joystick, which offers more convenient focus point adjustments when you have your eye to the electronic viewfinder. Speaking of the electronic viewfinder is both larger and has a higher resolution than the A7R III's predecessors. It's also impressively fast, though that's something to be expected on a high-end mirrorless camera nowadays. The A7R III is certainly larger than the last model, but it's not that much heavier. It's about 625 grams. The bigger body allows a bigger battery with over twice the capacity of the last model, meaning you won't be sweating battery life as much on a shoot. The A7R III now has two SD card slots, compared to one on the A7R. Only the bottom slot supports UHS 2, to best try out high-bandwidth 4K. One of the perks of the A7 series is a full complement of ports, including headphone, microphone, HDMI, flash sync and micro-B, USB. The A7R III ups the ante with a USB Type-C connector, which can not only be used for speedy transfers, but charging as well. Handy for tethered photography, the micro USB port also supports charging. The Sony A7R III uses the same sensor and has the same 42.4 megapixel count as its predecessor. As you'd expect, image quality is pretty much the same. Raw images are now captured at 14 bits instead of 12, and Sony has increased the dynamic range as well. That means you can crank up the ISO levels a bit more, because dark parts of an image are less noisy at higher ISOs. At the same time, its NR filters do a good job of smoothing any grain you do get. The A7R III keeps getting better at handling low light, and if you reduce an image from 42.4 down to 12.2 megapixels, that's going to substantially reduce the appearance of noise too. Sony promised and has delivered on better JPEG images too, with more true-to-life color accuracy and less aggressive sharpening than before. Some user says that the A7R III didn't work with Sony's Play Memories smartphone app, but Sony seems to have fixed that issue. The app lets you connect to the camera via NFC, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, see a live view, change settings like f-stop and aperture, and trigger photo or video capture. You can also transfer images from the memory card to the app. The A7R III also shoots video very impressively. With 8-bit, 16.8 million colors, Sony's A7R III may not support 10-bit video and a billion colors like Panasonic's GH5, but it's still arguably the best full-frame, mirrorless camera for video on the market. There are two 4K shooting modes, one at full-frame with some line skipping, and the other that uses APS-C cropping with a full sensor readout. Continuous focus worked very well on the A7R III. Sony gives video shooters both microphone and headphone inputs, audio levels, histograms and pretty much everything else you need. The 5-axis and body stabilization, coupled with lens stabilization, makes handheld video about as steady as it can possibly be. The A7R III is about as close a pro video camcorder as you're going to get in a mirrorless camera. For someone who shoots photos and video, the Sony A7R III is an awesome, multi-pronged tool. With a new battery, touchscreen and joystick, and USB-C port, Sony has solved many of the problems of its predecessors. The A7R III not only shoots great images and video, but also handles extremely well. It's so good that it may give a lot of Alpha A9 buyers pause. The A7R III is available at $3,200. So, what do you think of it? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoy this video, hit the like buttons and don't forget to subscribe.